All right. Okay. We're back live, folks. Hoi, whisht. It's great. It's great how whisht translates across all languages. Or maybe it's just a Glaswegian accent. Terrifies people. I remember once, it was round about Christmas time, and we were just walking down. I lived down in the south of England, and we were just walking home, and this person came out of a house and went, Merry Christmas. I went, aye, Merry Christmas to you too. And I didn't realise it sounded like a threat, but you know. It did. Anyway, so we've got a wee while to have some discussion. I'm sure that there's going to be lots of great questions. I've already had 2 questions from Alejandro, so I'm going to call on him in a second. But just to kind of pick up on what Ryan was talking about there, I'd like to ask kind of you, Joanna, and Kieran about, is there a need to reframe the narrative?
I wish we didn't need one. So I think I probably agree with all of it. I think reframing is always helpful, but I think I go back to, it's already been said earlier, we shouldn't even need to have to use the words, we shouldn't need to have these conferences and focuses. It should just be part of our kind of thinking and way of being, and perhaps with generations that come along after us, perhaps that's the great white hope, and that's what we should aim for. But your presentation of the arguments was I thought I was back at university. It was so it's kind of well beyond me. But I think we have to get to a point. We have to aspire to that this is embedded into everything that we think and do, and we shouldn't require the focus because it will just be intrinsically there.
Kieran,
I do agree. I think from a marketing perspective, the word consumer is problematic, and I feel like that's if we need to move beyond the notion that consumption is okay. And I definitely feel like sustainability is a byword. Somebody said, yes, somebody had a strategy on a slide yesterday that had the word transform on it. I haven't seen that on a sustainability strategy. And then Alex was talking about the difference between step changes, I think. And I think there's a lot of small actions and not enough transformation. But we're in a consumer goods business, and I think consumption is a problem. So yes.
Is it also the matter when you're saying that those kind of small steps, that perhaps from a consumer point of view, consumers are expecting big steps, but actually the small steps are actually really, really important. But everybody's kind of stepping back and going, well, where is the massive transformation? You know, rather than actually this incremental change that you were talking about.
I think, though, I was talking earlier, wasn't I, about having some kind of roadmap in place, and that a lot of companies that I work with tend to be terrified that because they're not very far along that journey, that they don't have a story to tell, and they're too frightened to say, well, we're not, we haven't made it yet. But so incremental is important, and I think being kind of open about that journey and saying it's linking our work. These things don't happen overnight. They don't happen without people. You need buy-in right down through the food chain in your businesses. Just going back to the word transform, it's interesting. I've got a manufacturing client who have what they call transformational projects. And all of those projects, which are big, big investments, they are all around sustainability. But they wouldn't be flagged up in the board report as sustainable. It just so happens that they will deliver a sustainability outcome, but they get labelled up as transformational, and that's the kind of the new byword there.
Ryan, reframing the narrative and that incremental change. Have you any kind of practical solutions to this?
I think the little steps, and I think a lot of the things that we talked about on sharing information and demonstrating kind of as a peer group. Yes, there might not be directly applicable things that would something you can adopt in your own business, but all of those things that you can change and start to make as little shifts all add up. Every little does help with those things, and I think what does happen sometimes with those more practical examples, things that you can change, and it might just simply be kind of ways of talking with your local council about waste management, you all of a sudden start the process and everything starts to feel easier from that point on. So I think you are right. Like, I mean, I would like there to be more drastic changes in things, but it's also, you know, not realistic. You know, I gave the example of White Lion. That's a very extreme shift, and it's not something that every business is going to do, and it's hard to retrofit that. But being able to like use kind of inspiration from other peers, see what they've done, and there's been so many great examples over the last couple of days. You know, even if you're not doing anything, just to be able to kind of get initiated with some of those bits starts the kind of ball rolling.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw it open to some questions. So we have Alejandro first, and then
Hi. So bear with me. I have not had enough coffee yet, but let's hope that this makes sense to everyone. We have so far been talking about, you know, like our sustainability strategies. How do you communicate it? How do you say, take it to the public? Let's not say consumer, right? But to the public, what you're doing. However, here's the thing: how do you sell to them two things that are normally or currently seen as unsustainable or like generally really bad? Which is one, at what point, and we've gone through this because growing malt basically in the Arctic is it's a bit of a pain. And like Desiree also mentioned, you know, like you get to a point where the location is so crazy on getting actually the agriculture going and then getting the knowledge on the farmers and then developing all this chain. Just at what point do you finally draw the line and say, this is not sustainable? It is more sustainable to buy malt from Scotland or somewhere else. And then how do you mention this to your consumer and say, no, yes, we are traveling half around the world doing a huge amount of CO2 emissions, but this is actually green? And then the other issue, which is a little bit from there, but it's also about how do you change that narrative, right? It's, you've got to this point, so now you're telling them that all these rationally unsustainable things are somehow sustainable. The other point would be, we agree, we go through years and years of research of barley to get to the strains that we now use in malt, right? And if you travel northern, southern hemisphere, if you coordinate those, then okay, you shorten that amount of time. But it takes a long time, and this is poking and prodding a plant to do what you want it to do, very gently over generations. That can be done in minutes in a lab, except everyone frowns upon it because it's called GMO, right? And then, oh no, GMO, Monsanto, think of all the children, and like literally people got killed because of this sort of thing. But at what point do we finally accept that global warming is happening within this decade? A lot of the places where we grow barley are not going to be able to grow barley anymore. And a lot of the places where we haven't been able to grow it properly, such as the Arctic, we need something that will withstand these things. And we cannot afford that the 14, 15, 20 years of research and development. We want something that's going to be able to do it now. So now if you do change that, how do you now sell this again to the consumer? How do you change that narrative into saying this is green or sustainable in a way? Because now we're actually long-term thinking about a barley that will feed people for a very long time, ideally, except it has to grow in a condition where it's not natively available. Sorry, really uncomfortable questions. Very early in the morning, but...
The answer I would try and give to that very good pair of questions is within that, there has to be education, doesn't there? These things are complex things. You know, I don't own an EV car because I have real concerns about lithium batteries and where lithium is mined. And I think that's a really concerning thing. And I'll bet you that most people don't bother to think about where that stuff comes from. And I'm uncomfortable with that to the point that I have yet to make that investment. And I'm sure that some of my clients probably sneer at me as I drive in a petrol car into their car park or whatever. What you're describing is an ecosystem, it's a balance, isn't it? And there are big decisions to be made about how we can continue to kind of keep that balance. But I think that there is responsibility on the stakeholders in this, probably in this room and your world and the people around you to try to educate your consumers, your business customers, whatever. But you need to try very hard, and perhaps with some professional help, to try to explain that balance and to explain why sometimes just making an assumption about what is sustainable or what isn't, or what we need to do to be more sustainable. I think that is all about working hard at education, because those are sometimes very difficult decisions, aren't they, and difficult things to change. So, it might answer part of your question. Do you have a...
My build on that would be, I think that's all absolutely right. I think, as a different example, we had something in the UK called Modern Slavery Act that came in, and we knew in fashion that clothes were being made in poor countries by people working in terrible conditions, and it was in the news and it was part of our discussion. And it was being discussed by government. The thing that made the change happen was the retailer. You said every little helps. It was Tesco. And when Tesco came out, they did two things. They forced the brands to change their behaviour. We had a transformation project to change ours. And it educated the shopper. And I think like we don't have to do it all, and we probably can't do it all. There will probably always be a certain type of consumer that's probably in the high net worth category that is going to travel and is going to have their stuff shipped around the world. And so balance is important, to Joanna's point, because that means that the 80% of the planet that is going to be responsible needs to do the work for them, and that is unfortunately the reality. But shoppers in chain retail environments or online in e-commerce, which is not so much a thing for us compared to other categories, is a great opportunity to educate them. And also in the UK, and I'm sorry to give you another example, but we have a supermarket called Iceland, founded by someone from Cheshire. He's not from us. Yeah. Iceland is a supermarket that no one was paying attention to. It was below the discounters. It was stack it high, sell it cheap, Iceland is the leader in sustainable packaging in the UK. It took Iceland to do package reduction in order for Marks and Spencer to do packet reduction, in my opinion. That is the order of things. And I think it took that brave move. And why did they do that? Well, it came from their values. And in terms of barley, I would love to believe that we can get to a world where science doesn't need to help us and we can remain organic. But personally, I just don't see that reality. I'm very much anti-modifying crops, but I think it has to be part of the solution. Otherwise, we're not going to make the target dates that we need to.
The only thing I'd add is not to reference my kind of point of the talk, but I think it doesn't need to be labelled as sustainable. I think if you focus on what you're, the stories around what you're creating is tremendously exciting, and by being able to excite the people who are buying the whiskey, kind of they can then delve into those stories. They can understand the balance that you're doing and the fact that you're doing these good actions. But I think by labeling it sustainable, you open a can of worms, because they're like, well, I thought sustainability was this, and you're saying that you're shipping it around the world. Like, the numbers don't mean anything to somebody. If you talk to somebody about, like, the average person about, like, the impact on carbon figures or something like that, that's not going to help them understand the picture. But if you talk about those human stories and the efforts that you are going to, like, it makes them feel like, understand that you're looking to do good with this. It's genuine that you're trying to do good work. It's more complicated than it's, we get it from like nearby, or we have to ship it in from further afield. I think the echoed statement around this is on that education, and I think it's just the opportunities to educate. Like, again, that point about facts, it's not that helpful, but nobody likes being like kind of told in that way. Whereas if it's like more of an emotive connection, then you're much more likely to be like, to buy into all of those like positive stories.
I'm just interested in that the barley, that second barley question. Maybe bring James in on that about barley selection and breeding, and can you see a point where GMO which is looked down upon, which isn't allowed in Scotch whisky at the moment, could that come into play?
I think the first question is, what is GMO? Because there is, without wanting to go down a technical rabbit hole, there was recombinant DNA technology, which was the end of the 90s. That was all the Monsanto stuff and transferring genes from one place to another. Now the most commonly talked about thing for the future is gene editing. That's something that can occur naturally in a field. It's not about transferring genes. Now, a lot of the world has decided gene editing isn't genetic modification. The EU has taken a position that it is. So we have to be clear what we're talking about. My own personal opinion, not for the, it's that we do have, I echo with that thing, we have a problem of, with feeding 9 billion people. And I don't think we should be putting tools off the table in, just because of that. Canada takes a good way. They would regulate products of, various breeding technologies rather than regulating the technologies themselves. And that means that you can decide what is the good of that product, what is it going to offer the world, and accept or reject it on that basis, rather than saying this technology is just not to go with. So we've got choices to make in the future, and we need choices.
Thanks, James. Thank you. I was just going to add something to that. I was speaking with Adam Hannett from Bruichladdich recently about big picture and what they're doing at Bruichladdich in terms of this word sustainability that we shouldn't be using anymore. And I mean, he made the point that logically they should go organic. That would be part of the whole framework of what Bruichladdich is standing for. But it was actually cheaper for them to buy organic barley from the mainland than it is to buy a ton of barley which is grown in Islay. But they're going to continue to buy the barley from Islay because, as he says, there's only maybe 10 harvests left, because of soil degradation. So they've got to start regenerative agriculture to actually get Islay up and running again. So they're not taking the perhaps logical step of going organic, but they're helping the community by not being sustainable or as sustainable as they could be. So there's one of your difficult choices, actually at work.
And I think it's also about the ownership of some of those things. Like it's pulling it back local, and I think that's important. I think half the reason it's been complicated around GMO is where does that ownership then lie? And you look to actually Alejandro's point yesterday about what happens in other communities, and I think there's an important point of all of these changes we should make should be about handing control back to those communities. Like that's what's great about what's going on Islay. It's bringing that back to those communities rather than what's potentially a different sustainable action, because the human part of that is so crucial. And once we start to look at regions in the world, that big moral problem of universalizability, you can't just expect us to say what should happen in some of those other markets. We have to, that control needs to lie in the hands of the people that are part of those communities.
Great, thank you. There was and then up to you, Paddy.
Hi, I was just interested in hearing the panel comment on what sometimes feels like a bit of a juxtaposition to me, where, and it's very in the spirit of the 30-second pitch, by the way. I can rationalise it and discuss it at length, but in the kind of 30-second pitch, where we're selling a Saturday night and leisure and pleasure, and at the same time, I mean, I work at a very sustainable distillery, at the same time I want to tell people about something that's quite deep and heavy, and so how do we deliver that quickly without getting doom and gloom? Because we trade in good times. Do you see what I mean? I want the same caveat as Alejandro. I haven't had enough coffee. But do you see what I'd be interested to hear everyone on the panel, if possible, just sort of comment on that kind of juxtaposition.
I think it's, from my perspective, this is kind of what that magic idea. You're trying to excite people. That's the primary goal. And then you want them to ask the questions rather than you dictate, forcing the information on them. So once they kind of go, oh my God, this is delicious, this is so great, and they ask you, how does it work that way? Why does it taste like this? Or any of those kind of starting points for conversation, it becomes a dialogue rather than a monologue then. And that's the key to me to kind of like that's why I was trying to talk about the idea of excitement. That to me is the crucial because it means that then people want to understand why. They want to know why it tastes that way. Why is it that magical? All of the stories, and that's human, environmental, like community. Like it allows us to kind of talk about all of that great work that we're doing, rather than just going, have this, taste this, and this is the reasons why it's good for the planet. From my perspective, it's about encouraging like a conversation, but that has to be initiated from the guest side.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I mean, if you look at other adult-orientated consumer goods products, tobacco, they face the same challenge, right? They are required and want to talk about the heavy stuff and also need to talk about the other stuff that they would describe as the benefit. That's a longer conversation. But I always say there are 3 types of comms: as inspire, engage, and inform, in that order. And if you want to change, I love the word magic, the word joy, nicked from McNean. But you inspire first, and it is heavy. But I also, to challenge slightly what Ryan said, is the different audiences for different messages, right? So some people won't care. And really we should all care because we're all living on planet Earth, but people don't care all the time. And I think getting the right balance of the level of message is important too. I think the other thing I would say is joy is like scientifically proven to build better memory structures. So if you want people to remember what you're saying, joy. If you look at Wiggle, which is a business I used to work on in sports, we rebranded from being we were a bike business, to being a logo. I'm going to raise my arms. It looks like this, because the one thing that's common at the end of every triathlon, swim, cycle, runner is people cross the finish line like that. And we had a whole load of science to back up that joy was a better builder of memory structure. So.
Can't really follow that. I mean, perfect. The only thing I was just going to add from a marketing perspective is that there's a time and a place for everything, isn't there? And there's appropriate communication and types of communication, and you choose as a marketeer or business owner, whatever, very carefully when to kind of to go for the longer story. And I'm not, I'm a work in sustainability, but I ain't no joy killer when it comes to, to this stuff. So I don't think I can add much more beyond that, but there is time and a place, and you don't need to kill that kind of, kill the magic, I would say.
We had another question. Right, yeah, right up the back.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on the previous question and what James was saying earlier, and I was wondering, Dave, if I could sort of hijack the room slightly, because I'd be really interested to find out where everyone stands on gene editing of crops, because something what Ryan was saying earlier, that you can completely change the conversation and throw some crazy ideas into the mix, and if the 9 billion people food problem is going to be fixed, then maybe this is a solution that is acceptable, but I don't know if it's acceptable. I would love to know, on a sort of show of hands, if people are for or against. Can I do that? Can I answer?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
So maybe if you put your hands up to say it's not okay, and you because effectively what we're saying is if the EU has banned it, and maybe we'll rethink that, we're basically saying we think the EU is wrong, and we think we should be allowing this kind of technology. So
who's for gene editing? Yeah.
Yeah. All in favour, raise your hands.
And who is fundamentally against it?
Ooh.
There you go. There's your answer.
And there were some abstentions.
Democracy at work. Yeah. Who isn't sure? Yeah.
Okay. So there's an.
You can't vote twice.
You didn't tell us that.
No. I think we need James to give an educated piece of this, and then we'll do it again. But that's really interesting. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great stuff. Offsetting. Is it just a sticking plaster?
Well, I think there's going to come a time, and I wonder if it's just around the corner where this will be the dirty word, and I think to some extent it is the dirty word. It's it's the potential for the greenwash. I'm very uncomfortable with it, and I think having got a few clients at the moment who've kind of achieved what they need to do on scopes 1 and 2, and they're looking at scope 3, and oh my word, there's such a long way to go for some businesses. I personally am not comfortable at all with the whole concept, and there's also something called carbon insetting, and there are people in the drinks industry who I won't name.
No, go on.
Who let the dogs out? Do you remember them? Brewdog. I mean, there's been a big thing in the sustainability media and sector. I had a very interesting conversation that was at board level with a PLC not that long ago, where we were asked to brief the chief exec and the chief financial officer about carbon insetting, and that was basically, buying, forest, planting forest over a very long term. Blah, blah, blah. And guess whose name came up, which was Brewdog. And somebody said, but I've just seen it in the press. And they're causing a lot of upset, and it's not very popular. So I don't know. I think the whole thing needs real thought about whether or not the tide is going to turn. And I think if it turns, I think it's going to turn very, very quickly. So I think be prepared.
Yeah, I agree with that. We are really good at dual tracking. We have whiskies we release in 5 years, 7 years, 3 years. 1 year, one last night was beautiful. And we have whiskies that, certainly in Scotland, are 20, 30, 40 years. And we're really good at that. And that is exactly the skill you need for sustainability. Offsetting is short term. It's your 3-year-old whiskey. It's the minimum basic thing. When I told our commercial teams a few weeks ago in Edinburgh that it was effectively like moving money around bank accounts, which it is, they were slightly appalled that that's what they'd all been kind of understood to be a good thing. And we've got really good partners on this, but just to give you one example, we have a hydrodam pretty much next to the Jura distillery, but we had to wait for that credit to be available for us to buy it for the Jura distillery. It'd been bought by someone else in another country. I think that's really problematic, because that's kind of, that ought not exist. What it does do is it gets you in the habit of measurement and carbon accounting. But I think someone took a pragmatic view to say, right, we've got to do the big stuff. What can we do that's halfway? Offsetting is on the way to halfway, but it's not a solution. And I think you're right. If I had been at Brewdog, I would have spoken
There's
to...
a book.
Yeah.
And a song title.
Yeah, it's also a discussion last night. I'm not singing today. I haven't got the voice for it. Next time, if maybe when you tell us where it is, the friend will do karaoke next time. Community engagement. Buying a plot of land that is 1 million miles away from where you're based feels the opposite of what could happen. But certainly for us as an industry, replanting has a different purpose, right? Peat. I can't remember who said peat's only, it might be James, peat's only a small part of the problem. That's true, but we've also contributed to it over 180 years. So peat feels like something we ought to do for a different reason, and replanting, do it for a different reason. But offsetting feels like it's going to fall apart, I think.
It's kind of hard to add anything more to that.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. That's good. That's kind of the Basti Hauser approach. Yeah.
Yes. No.
That's it. No. Yeah. How conscious are you that all of this can just make companies seem just incredibly smug? Look at me, I'm sustainable. And how do you convince consumers that it's real?
Well, words, not deeds, or deeds, not. I think we've got. I'm not in, the market that you're in, doing, stuff at the kind of the coalface of consumer marketing, but I think that consumers can smell out inauthenticity, and I think that I think these things just stand out, and I see it in the business to business market. There is nothing worse and nothing more obvious, is there, than a brand which sort of smacks of gloat and smugness. I think I can sense it, and that's okay. I might be an empath, but I don't think I'm that unusual. I mean, you do this all day, every day. What do you think?
I mean, people do sense it if they care about it, which is a sizable population. I mean, I think it's hard to argue that Mark Rainier hasn't done a brilliant job, and there's a lot to learn from Waterford, Bruichladdich as well, Renegade. I think the challenges are more around, don't just tell me once, or don't just show me once. Like, show me, don't tell me, but show me again, show me again. So for the brand teams, it's about finding ways to bring to life sustainability in a way that's totally and utterly connected to who you are as a brand. It talks to something about your brand that's distinctive and differentiated, but you need to keep going and keep going again. I mean, we could have Greg talked about Feta Ken for all of 5 minutes yesterday. We could have done that for an hour because we're trying to just remind people we are trying to be green there. We're on the journey to being green, and here's the 20 ways in which that comes to life. And I think it's about repetition.
Yeah, I think going back to the point of people can sniff it a mile off. I think it's very obvious. I think there are few that do it in a kind of worthy or holier than thou way. So actually, I don't think. I mean, we had a little restaurant that looked to try and have positive effects, and there was never any like issue from a consumer point of view. Nobody ever really challenged us and kind of said it was being smug. But actually, I think there was a lot of kind of industry murmurs around that, and I think that there's obviously an aspect. I think when you talk about this topic, it feels like you're calling somebody else out, and I think a lot of people have seen the work that we do. You described it as provocative. They've seen it as like 2 fingers up to the rest of what's going on, and I don't think the majority of people who are working to kind of push this topic are doing it in a manner to be holier than thou or to shame people. Like, you don't motivate people through shame, so like it's certainly not something that I think anybody in the room is trying to do talking about this topic. But I think it's a difficult thing to kind of convey about how much, and this is why that like sharing and that education piece is really important, because the consumers can smell it, so they're grand on that side. I think they're very kind of excited to hear about like kind of stories. I think for peer groups, it's important to kind of share that stuff so it doesn't come across as being like worthy in any way.
I mean, how much did you learn from White Line? People saying, "Well, it's just a gimmick."
Yeah.
I mean, what did you take away? Did you take anything away from that in terms of how you then communicated the approach in all the other bars?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because I think White Lion, like, it almost went through the kind of a journey. It was the most hated bar in the world for one period of time, and then I think when people saw that it was being done for authentic reasons, it kind of then became something that people wanted to learn about, and got very excited to kind of adopt some of those principles. So I think we ended up. Because we didn't talk about it when we first started White Lion, we didn't talk about, the reasons behind doing that work were, there was a professionalism aspect, and there was what we wanted to challenge in terms of kind of what it is to be a bartender, but mainly it was about the idea of waste. And as soon as we switched to kind of pulling that narrative forward, and people then understood that it wasn't for gimmick, it allowed us to have a lot of different other conversations. So I think that taught us a lot. Like, it taught us that, again, we're all in it together. So being able to, create parallels for people that they can then adopt became very, very useful. So I think we ended up changing the way that we communicated to talk not only, initially we just talked to the guests coming through the bar, and then we ended up talking more kind of technically to kind of peer groups about things.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Kieran, I'm just aware of time.
Thank you for having me.
I don't want you to miss your flight. Before he goes, I think a round of applause for everything.
Yes.
That's Kieran Healy-Ryder storming off set.
Stage right.
Any questions? Yeah, James.
Thanks, Ingvar, and thanks, panel. I'd like to ask a question related to something that Alex Bruce raised yesterday. And there has been so much focus on the environment, naturally enough. You want to make sure that everything's healthy and being restored and in a good place. But yeah, Alex mentioned, the bottom line and are we looking after people well enough? And Joanna, you and I and Alex, we were talking about this on the coach as well. And I just wonder, especially Ryan, with the hospitality industry coming back after COVID, I think it's great and very important that we get messaging to consumers. But how do we feel like the systems we're a part of are treating people better Are we in a better place after the pandemic, and could we be doing better as well?
Absolutely can be doing better. I think it's not a yes or no kind of answer. I think some things were made much more kind of aware to a larger group of people as a result of the pandemic, and it allowed people to kind of take ownership and address some of those problems. But you also then started to realize how systemic some of that stuff is, and actually, to be able to make things work better for our people, we need to change a lot more. And that's where you realize how like symbiotic it is with so much more that surrounds us. So it's really tough. Like it's a very difficult position at the moment. I know everybody's talking about kind of the effects on hospitality, but I think it's pretty universal in general. And I think it's highlighted how much we need to go beyond just like what's in front of us and our team members, but how can we affect things? How can we convince government change to be able to kind of create a better stability for all of these industries? And we have a long way to go. I think it's one thing that like everybody's talking about is not only how do we like pay people better, create better conditions, but how do we attract people to our industries? There was a beautiful thing about, I think, food and drink that people kind of fell into it. They, stumbled across it rather than necessarily trained for it because, again, it feels very exciting to be part of. So you get bitten and then you stick with it. But we're not attracting people in that same way anymore. So how do we find ways to, there were some great examples from, some of these more rural communities. How do you demonstrate of giving back? And I think the initiatives are super inventive and are wonderful examples of how we have to think quite creatively on, making sure people understand that this is a viable kind of career for the whole of their lives, and it's an amazing thing to be part of. But we're not doing that at the moment. And we have, we talked, Kieran talked about tax and the stigma towards our part of food manufacturing. We get very little support in terms of, governments don't really care to talk about hospitality or food manufacturing as being a viable industry to go into. So I think we need to end up having more honest adult conversations around those things. But the only way that we're going to start to be able to create like balanced long-term change is by affecting those other systems as well. Sorry, it's very hard to answer that, so I feel like it was a bit waffly, but it's at the same time I remain really optimistic. There has been some great changes, and I think there is a general consensus about we need to get kind of the greener people into the industry and keep demonstrate how exciting it can be, and so many people are banding together around that that I think it has the opportunity to affect that change, but also look after those more hygiene factors around making sure that it's a safe place to work as well.
I think my response is there's been a paradigm shift in attitudes to all sorts of things as a result of COVID, and things that were happening have been accelerated. I think it was our conversation on the coach the other day, and we were talking about the kind of the great resignation. There are lots of people in their sort of mid to late 20s who are deciding that, I can go off and do something else. What do you do as employers? I'd imagine that everybody in here is either an employer or is working in a team, and people may report to you. It's very difficult, I think, at the moment. The whole kind of talent attraction, retention thing. There are all sorts of things that you can do in your businesses in terms of workplace strategies, attitudes to well-being, I was going to say CSR, but your sustainability kind of commitments, well-being should be part of that, development, training, opportunity. We've talked a lot about kind of, bringing young people, for example, into some of your distilleries and building up skills. Some of these things, they should be seen as part of the sustainability story. They don't have to be on the back of every packet. I have to pack it, sort of pack box. But it's there is a lot going on, and there are all sorts of things which are the touch points, and we don't have time to go to all those. This isn't a workplace kind of, or a well-being conference, but I would say that, you know, as I'd mentioned in my kind of talk earlier, somewhere like this, I think, is a great example where we are right now in this Stauning environment of somewhere where I would imagine that people want to come to work. You know, what is it? And I think if you can look for best practice, look at people who are doing things well, look at people who are keeping their people and investing. Look at how other people do it. Talk to your colleagues, talk to people over coffee. How are you doing it? What's working, what isn't? I think there's something happening at the moment. There's a real shift around the people, and I think it will settle. It will settle. But there are a lot of people who are very worried about it. HR professionals, talent attraction people in companies of all sizes are extremely worried, and they are spending a lot of money on external help to try and find ways to keep people where they want them or to get new ones that they want to keep for longer.
Thank you. Time for one other question, I think, before we wrap up. James.
I liked what you said about people being transparent with their sustainability journey and reporting the fact they're perhaps not there yet, reporting things that don't work.
Yeah.
Do you feel that some of the NGOs are a barrier to that type of reporting and create greenwash because you can only report success or you get too criticised?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure how equipped I am to kind of answer perhaps a technical answer. What I do know is that I think that there is such a fear factor at boardroom level about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, and divestment from, you know, from particularly, you know, obviously the public businesses. I can't really comment from my own experiences in my industries of whether the NGOs kind of stand in the way of that and put the fear of God and people don't report adequately, or perhaps the failures. But I think sometimes it's about personalities in businesses. So you probably need in every business a champion on sustainability matters. I've got two of the most important men in my life are both Scotsmen. They both are sustainability leads in two publicly listed companies. They're both whiskey drinking Glaswegians, weirdly, and don't even know each other. But both of them, when I think of the extraordinary efforts that those two guys I have watched make over the last few years to sell into and upwards into their businesses, the communications piece, you know, they don't come from comms backgrounds, the engineering bit, the process efficiency bit, every part of the story. And actually, sometimes it's that champion that has to say to the big boss, you know what, we ain't done so good this year. We're not quite where we meant to be on the roadmap, but you know what? We've done some good on some other stuff, and sometimes the other stuff can get you out of the hole. We had a thing very, very recently, nothing to do with me, thank God, where the client had added up the numbers a bit wrong for a report on carbon, and it was 2% out, and you should have seen the faces when that had gone public. Because, of course, it can affect share price if you tell you know, what looks like a wop. But you know what? There were other stories to be told, and thank heavens the champion in that business, the whiskey-drinking Glaswegian, you know, came to the rescue and said, OK, let's think about what we can do because we've done good elsewhere, you know, and we've made that story. So I'm not sure if that quite answers, but I'll try and we'll discuss it on the train when we're going to Copenhagen.
Just thinking of it, it was something that we chatted about earlier when we were having our conversation the other week, which is about the boards in some companies. Obviously, you've mentioned whiskey-drinking Glaswegians, or just Glaswegians, as we're known.
Yes, I did. Yes, I'd forgotten that they were the same thing.
Yeah. But, you know, I know from experience, and naming no companies here, but, you know, there are people who have the title, you know, head of sustainability, et cetera, who effectively have just been promoted from sales or whatever. So is there we've been talking a lot about disconnects. Is there a disconnect within companies that they don't necessarily understand what it is. The people who are meant to be making the decisions don't actually know what the subject is.
I think my experience is that in really big companies, at a board level, you get unbelievably intelligent people who are really strong on the numbers and what have you, but they are often lacking confidence in the detail on sustainability. Sustainability, the people that work in sustainability and have it in their job title will have come from two routes. If they are under 40 or possibly late 30s, they probably have done a master's in environmental something or other. They will have come through the university route. They will be clever, they will be bright, but they will have had a career in sustainability. So Kieran, who was sitting here, I chatted to him last night and this morning. He's a marketeer. He's like me. He's gone a different route. He has ended up with the brief on sustainability in that business, which is interesting. So he's come a marketing route. He's just over 40. What you tend to find in lots of companies is that it's the person who is responsible for process optimization, quality management, or HR, could be HR, could be health and safety, quality. So any of those functions are often in businesses that make things, that matter whether you're making bricks or whiskey. Those people are, if they're over 40, because there's been such a change in all these things, they are often the people responsible. And I have to admit, they are often, for me, some of the easiest to work with because they're such realists and they understand how things work. If somebody is charged with sustainability and they don't know what happens in the process, if you turn the tap down or if you use less water or you turn the kiln up, you can't have, those things are product critical, aren't they? So if you've got somebody who is coming in from the outside and has kind of probably got a consulting background and says, well, it's easy. Let's just change the mix. Let's just change the process. No. So, but that does happen, and you can't have that because. And so I'm a big fan of the kind of the realists that have come up through.
Yeah. Brian, are you encountering that at all in our world?
I mean, everybody I've dealt with in big companies to kind of small, I think has come from that route. They've ended up like honing in because they either are passionate about it or have got an insight that allows them to kind of make effective change in that space. So actually, I think it's the other side is because it's such a changing topic. Like it's in no way static, and there's always new things to consider. Most of the people I've encountered are very well read on things and will keep up to date about the fact that things are changing, and they can't just apply strict solutions to things. They need to constantly tweak, and having that like intimate knowledge of what they're working with, to Joanne's point, is crucial.
Mm. So finally, because we're about to have a lovely treat from Stauning, Alex is looking very excited. I'm excited because I know what it is. Are you optimistic, pessimistic, or stoical?
Do you want to go first?
I'm always optimistic. I partly outlook, but I think it is really exciting. You're seeing so many incredible, there's a really nice thing in the world where people are coming up with incredible solutions in their bedrooms. They're finding new technologies, but looking at the cat and the unicorn over there, it's being connected more so now than it ever has been. And again, fast-tracked by things like the pandemic. Despite the fact that there is some pretty terrifying things that we're facing and some very frustrating things, again, I go back to that kind of governmental aspect that I think needs to be doing more. You see these incredible shifts coming through that you can only remain optimistic about that. You can only feel excited by it because you're seeing people care. We're very inventive as a species. We're very good at translating that excitement to others. I think it is snowballing in terms of that. And now, because the fact that by nature of the topic it is all interlinked, it's getting incredible bridges into other bits of technology, other industries that mean that we're able to create much more effective solutions. So I feel very optimistic about things. And I think you have to remain so. It's very easy to get terrified by what surrounds and the quite scary facts and figures and things that get demonstrated to us.
And because this isn't a BBC interview, unfortunately, both speakers agree with each other. I absolutely agree with that. I'm an optimist. I'm also a realist. And I think I agree with you. I don't think there's ever been a time when there is more attention from the right people. I think that the solutions will come from the innovators, from science, from academia, from industry. People will have to be inventive. You know, I go back to the point about the cars question, the question of the day, yesterday. We absolutely will have to do things. And I think the really important thing is the word accelerate. You know, we need catalysm, and we need acceleration. So things need to move faster. And any of you who are thinking of doing things or trying things or innovating, for God's sake, just do it, because the cost of inertia, sitting on your backside and doing nothing for 6 months or a year whilst you wait and see what happens with the energy prices, please don't. You know, you need to do things sooner and quicker, and sometimes to take that risk. So I am an optimist. I do not lie in bed worrying about this stuff. I really don't, because I think we'll be all right.
Well, on that wonderfully positive note, thank God they weren't pessimists.
Yeah.
You know, that would have ended our forum on a real downer. Thank you. It's a great way to end. Please, a round of applause for our panel. You're free to low. Yeah. Alex, you were going to say something from our hosts. We've got a few little kind of wrap-up things to do.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming to Stauning. It's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you to Dave and Ingvar and Zoe and Jan for choosing Stauning Whisky to host the World Whisky Forum. It's been amazing. It's been a bit tough also, all this whiskey drinking, especially last night. Long evening, but great whiskey. To kind of celebrate this special event, 10 years ago this day, we actually bottled our very first single malt whiskey. We discovered this 2 days ago, right, Lasse? I think actually Google or Facebook told Lasse that 10 years ago we did this. So before you leave, before you have lunch, please go to the bar outside, and we'll serve you a very small glass of first edition peated, it's called. I think we made, how many bottles did we make, Lasse? I can't remember. 700 bottles, yeah. So for us, an extremely important whiskey. Does it taste good? Well, you'll have to judge for yourself. It's the very first single malt. So thank you very much for coming. And yeah. You can actually see us bottling right here. Rasmus, one of the founders, Mogens, Lasse's dad, one of the founders, and Herluf, the first employee in Stauning Whisky, is at that picture doing that. So, thank you.
Alex, thanks so much, man. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as the song goes, the end is near. Just a couple of things to wrap up. Thank you, first of all, to the team at Stauning, to Lasse, to Lisa, who's done amazing work behind the scenes, Alex, and Anna as well for organising all transport and everything. A big round of applause, because they have put on an amazing show. Yeah. It's not an easy thing to pull off at the best of times, and I think they have absolutely excelled themselves. We've had an absolutely fantastic time, so it's great. Just a couple of thoughts to kind of wrap up. I was kind of writing down 3 C words, but don't turn off the cameras. About themes which seem to emerge over the past couple of days. There's connection, and the need to re-establish connections, perhaps, between farmers and distillers, etc. And this understanding that this is an interdependent world. This is an interdependent industry. We all rely on each other, and we rely on a whole number of other industries, other activities, other people, in order to make our businesses grow and be sustainable. But actually, it's the whole world. We're all connected. And I think that the connection that you notice, you know, whether it's just people talking together, or the connections which have been made in terms of greater understanding of where we all sit within this world, has really come to the fore. The other thing is creativity. If we're going to do this, we have to be creative. We have to, in Ryan's phrase, we have to accept the weird. We've got to look for these alternatives. We've got to look for possible solutions, or even impossible solutions. We have to find ways to do it. And the most important thing, community. We've got to take care of our communities, whether that's our workforce or the wider community in which a distillery is set, because we're all in this together. And if we all stay as a community, we will get through it in creative and intelligent ways. So thank you so much for coming along. We will see you again soon. And we're going to have a wee video, I think, about where the next World Whisky Forum is going to be.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Koji Shimaoka, CEO and founder of KDI.
Hello, Ian Chang, VP and Master Blender of KDI.
We are honored to be chosen as the venue for 2024 World Whisky Forum. We are extremely excited and can't wait to welcome all friends and colleagues in the industry to our historic whiskey town, Komoro and Karizawa. We look forward to see you all in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, book your tickets soon, guys. We're off to Japan. Thank you all for coming. You guys make it, you know, so it's been an absolute treat hosting you here. So thanks for all the questions. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the drams. Thanks for the mezcal. See you around the block. Thank you.